We're going to go into the actions committed by both sides in this, and we'll be talking about the nature of what is happening right now with the recent persecution of the I.D.F. raiding the Gaza Strip, as well as asking the people of Palestine to evacuate northern Gaza because they were going to raid it with 100,000 I.D.F. soldiers, bringing in that of 300,000 reservists from the I.D.F., Israel's entire country being activated military personnel if you are of fighting and voting age. Let's go ahead and jump in and see this. The thing that's so tragic about this is what we're seeing is the ramping up of the rhetoric that will only lead to the devaluing of the thing that matters most, which is making sure that we salvage every human life possible when it comes to this conflict. Because all that will happen when we see people become more and more war hungry is that they will become further bloodthirsty with their rhetoric, and what will happen then is that the value of civilian life will be tossed out the window in the pursuit of making sure that nation states can acquire land. Let's go ahead and jump into this and talk about the fact of all the war crimes that are now going to be committed under what's going on under the persecution of the Gaza Strip. If you're looking for a tribal ideological defense of either side of this conflict, you're in the wrong place. We're here to look at the nuance of what's going on and see the travesty of what is befalling every single person that is on either side of this conflict. Let's go ahead and jump in. We're going to be starting with Dr. Simon Gadek. In recent days, Israel has been murdering UN staff, disconnected electricity and water for 2 million people, bombarded a border crossing to block humanitarian aid, and announced intentions to bombard a hospital. How can we, as a Christian society based on charity and forgiveness, silently accept and even justify these human rights violations? I oppose both the war with terror that has been pushed by Hamas, especially this barbaric and cowardly attack on innocent civilians, and the disproportionate state terror by Israel. Rather than letting the cycle of violence escalate, both parties should do everything in their power to cease hostilities, as more violence only begets more violence. And this is absolutely true, and what he's referencing is right here. We have these articles, which we will be jumping into in just a moment. We have a host of articles that we will just be sifting through the titles of. Everything will be linked in the description down below, so you can go check them out yourself. I've gone through all of them, and the thing is, it's all tragic, and do not expect me to be defending either side. There are war crimes being committed by Hamas. There are war crimes being committed by the I.D.F. in Israel. There is no excuse to allow civilians to fall into the crossfire for a territorial dispute. But the thing is, my perspective many of times, as well as someone like Dr. Simon Gadek, will not matter, because what it comes down to is we are talking about the process of people fighting a holy war that is generations old. We are talking about a land that is stained with so much blood that you will never be able to wash away the smell of iron from the soil. Now we're going to go ahead and jump into Eudaimonia, who has a tweet, and this was put out on October 7th, and it's something that I've referenced in, I believe, both of my Israel-Palestine videos, because it is so perfect as a jumping off point to set the precedent of what this really means for so many people in this conflict. These men see themselves as waging a holy war. They are not mere freedom fighters fighting for better material conditions or political liberation. They are waging a holy war for the Holy Land. Everything else pales in comparison. The secular West must understand this. It won't. And that is something that I feared someone like Dr. Simon Gadek does not understand, is that they are waging a holy war, and in their eyes, no action is seen as unjust. And also, considering the rhetoric of both Israel and Hamas has been consistently pushed that the Israelis are conditioned to believe that Palestinians are less than human, and Palestinians are conditioned to believe that the Jewish people of Israel are less than human. Well, what we have is consistent demonization, and either side being completely okay with persecuting each other to the nth degree. Now, let's go ahead and jump into John Kirby. And this is from Brian Lieb of Florida, and it says, Hamas wouldn't have been able to function at all had it not been propping up the Iranian regime. Who propped up the Tehran, John? Who did it? Who? You and your colleagues. Blood is on your fucking hands. And that's absolutely true, because the U.S. establishment are the people who propped this up in the first place.
Hamas wouldn't have been able to function at all had it not been for propping up by the Iranian regime. But we haven't seen any specific evidence that tells us they were witting, involved in the planning, or involved in the resourcing and the training that went into this very complex set of attacks over the weekend.
So, we had someone like John Kirby roll out on TV recently crying, talking about the fact of seeing 40 dead babies, which has not officially been confirmed. And if it is true, I would not be surprised whatsoever if Hamas committed these actions. But what we need to understand is, when we are in the fog of war, there are many things that can be used by governments as propaganda pieces so they can use them as a catalyst to activate a populace through a moral crisis into war. and that is something we need to pay attention to. You have people like Lindsey Graham openly coming out and saying if Iran is not directly connected and there is no proof detected, we should still be bombing Iranian oil depots to spite Hezbollah. Are you kidding me? The people within the foreign policy establishment have been looking for a war with Iran, and they will gladly use a crisis in the Middle East and bleed both Palestine and Israel dry of their civilians if it means they get their end goal, which is war with Iran. Now we're going to go on to Nuance Bro. He says, basically what I've been saying since the beginning and getting chastised for it. Meanwhile, one of the most pro-Israel voices out there, Charlie Kirk, is saying basically the same thing. Nah, he must be on the side of Hamas now, according to all of these lunatics out there. And what he's referencing is this clip of Charlie Kirk on the Patrick Bet-David podcast. PBD podcast is fantastic. I cannot recommend it enough. PBD is genuinely incredible. Amazing interviewer, wonderful intellect. He's wonderfully well-spoken, incredibly deep when it comes to the process of how he brings you through his process of thought, and I really appreciate it. He's great at extrapolating on how multiple different people approach different subjects with so many different varying approaches. Again, cannot recommend PBD enough. Let's go ahead and jump into this clip of Charlie Kirk.
I've been to Israel many times. The whole country's a fortress. When I first heard this story, I still had the same gut instinct that I did initially. I find this very hard to believe. I've been to that Gaza border. You cannot go 10 feet without running into a 19-year-old with an AR-15 or an automatic machine gun that is an I.D.F. soldier, right? The whole country is surveilled. And so let me just kind of go through this. We don't talk about Israeli politics very often, and most Americans don't know this. The last 9 months, Israel was on the brink of civil war. It's not an exaggeration. This judicial stuff, there were hundreds of thousands of Israelis taking to the streets because Bibi Netanyahu was basically redefining the Israeli constitution. That's not an exaggeration, right? He said the judicial branch has too much power. There were protests planned this week against Netanyahu, where they anticipated tens of thousands of people to take to the streets. That's all gone, Patrick. Netanyahu now has an emergency government and a mandate to lead. I'm not willing to go so far that saying that Netanyahu knew or there was intelligence here, but I think some questions need to be asked. Was there a stand down order? Was there a stand down order? 6 hours? I don't believe it. Israel's the size of New Jersey. When I took a helicopter ride from Jerusalem to the Gaza border, it's 45 minutes. Wow. 6 hours. They're live streaming the killing of Jews. Did somebody in the government say stand down? That is a legitimate, non-conspiracy question. The whole country is the I.D.F. The whole country is. Yeah. And you're trying to tell me that they're going to concerts and kibbutzes and schools and by report.
So, Charlie Kirk talking about the tragedies that are befalling the people of Israel when it comes to the citizenry that are being slaughtered by Hamas and the barbaric, inhumane attacks where they are butchering people in schools, kibbutzes. They're going around to even Christian churches, slaughtering people there. They're going around to concerts, as we saw, and they are killing indiscriminately. But here's the thing. There are many times that the rhetoric that we are seeing from even civilians on the ground that are countering this when they're talking about the soldiers that they've encountered with Hamas, which that is for you to take with a grain of salt. The thing we need to understand is, as I've said, we are in the fog of war, and we are going to be susceptible to many different degrees of war propaganda. Okay, so Nuance Bro, I would argue, absolutely spot on with this topic. If you want to see someone who hasn't fallen for the war propaganda, stayed relatively, I would say, on point about basically everything, and I mean everything, which I didn't expect this to be something Nuance Bro was so good on, because I followed him initially because he was talking about things like the Second Amendment and local crime when it came to things that were just, let's say, infecting American cities when it came to the nature of the progressive DAs that were completely destroying the ability for people to, let's say, live prosperous lives within these inner cities because of these Soros-backed DAs that consistently let people out to be repeat offenders. But again, like I said, I did not expect Nuance Bro to be such a staunch and open voice against things like the war propaganda that is coming out of the machinations of the war machine. On to another tweet from Nuance Bro. He says, soon more children will be dead from Israel's retaliation than all the people Hamas killed in their attack. We've already seen pictures and videos of children and babies decapitated in Gaza, while people tried to spread the propaganda about the same happening in Israel with zero evidence. The same who claimed beheaded babies in Israel are making no mention of decapitated children and babies in Gaza, because the truth is many of them were only along for the propaganda of the war. They're not actually on Team Humanity. It's a tribal war, and it's all about their team. Now on to the nature of the human cost of the Israeli and Palestinian conflict, and we've already used this graph once before when talking about this in one of my videos when talking about this conflict. So here's the thing. As you can see, the completely asymmetrical dispersion of the death and destruction and the injuries that have befallen both the people of Israel and Palestine. You can tell that this is clearly a one-sided war, and with it, we see that we are about to see a one-sided persecution as Gaza is leveled. Let's go ahead, jump into what we have from Al Jazeera, and this is live updates. Israel and Hamas live news. Iran tells Israel to stop before it's too late. Iran warned Israel to immediately halt its war crimes against Gaza or it could face a huge earthquake of resistance. More than 320 Palestinians have been killed in the past 24 hours, including many women and children killed in Israeli air raids on convoys fleeing Gaza City, according to health officials. And what it's talking about when they're talking about convoys fleeing the city, well, there are rumors going around that Israel is airstriking civilian convoys that are being told to flee out of northern Gaza, which is exactly what Israel told them to do. But there are also many suspicions around this due to the fact that when you watch the videos, you do not actually see a missile impact, and there are thoughts that this could have been an IED placed by Hamas to use their own people as human collateral to tarnish that of the I.D.F. in Israel and say that they are targeting civilians that are trying to escape a war zone that they funneled them into a choke point of. We do not know which direction this is going. As I've said, fog of war, we need to keep our heads straight and understand the nature of what is happening, but we need to see what is going on and realize the nature of the destruction that is going to continue to persecute the innocent people of this land. On to CNN, we have no water, Gaza faces deeper humanitarian crisis as Israel tightens its hold. On to Al Jazeera again, the Rafah crossing between Gaza and Egypt has been disrupted by Israeli air raids, with Israel declaring a total blockade of Gaza, crossing with Egypt as the single point in and out of the besieged enclave. So, there were people who were Egyptian citizens, thousands of them in fact, carrying massive packs through the desert across the Egyptian border into Palestine to bring water and food to the suffering people because of Israel's blockade and shutting them off of resources. We're going to go ahead and see Israel bombs Rafah crossing to block Egypt aid to Gaza, and this was in response to the Egyptian citizens, not the Egyptian government giving aid, the Egyptian citizenry. Now we see Israel said to bomb Rafah crossing to Egypt after telling Gazans to flee through it. So, Israel has told you to go to this specific crossing. The only way that the people in Palestine actually have to evacuate out of northern Gaza is to flee to southern Gaza, and the only borders they could actually evacuate to would be that of Jordan and that of Egypt. But Egypt won't allow them through, and neither will Jordan unless they are going to be strong-armed by the UN or the United States, which very well may happen in recent coming hours or days. Here we see 11 UN staff, 30 pupils at UN schools killed in Gaza, says UN spokesperson. Well, it turns out that people who work for the UN, not only Israeli citizens, but people from multiple different countries across the UN, are now dying in this war. And we see that it's because they are being bombed endlessly. And how do we know if they're dying, whether it's an Israeli targeting or Palestinian targeting from Hamas? We don't know. But here we see Guterres calls for civilians to be protected. International humanitarian law is upheld as Israel targets Hamas and Palestinian enclave with bombs. Well, is Israel in the process of targeting these Palestinian enclaves effectively killing UN staff, or is it them dying from Hamas? We do not know, but we have to keep our head on a swivel to understand the nature of what will happen in these conflicts. Now, there is nowhere to hide from the bombs. Civilians trapped in Gaza can't escape Israel's siege. On from CNBC. The Gaza Strip is under its sixth day of bombings by the Israeli Air Force. Israel on Monday ordered a total siege of Gaza, cutting off water, food, and electricity to 2.2 million residents, which is classified as a war crime under the Geneva Convention. Israel has ordered 1.1 million people to evacuate northern Gaza, but they remain trapped in the blockaded enclave. And that's absolutely true. They blockaded them in, bombed their way out, told them to evacuate, gave them no way to get out, is what it appears. And then with that, they're now going to cause the mass slaughter of the people on the ground. There are rumors going around that Israel is talking about cutting off access to the internet within Palestine so that they can effectively, I would argue, diminish people's capacity to see the war crimes they will be committing. Now we go on to what we see from the New York Post. Progressives call for U.S. to take in some of the expected 1 million Gazan refugees. No, I'm sorry, but this isn't the answer. The answer isn't to bifurcate the culture of the United States and, with the process of doing so, completely annihilate our ability to even have a stable funding and footing at home. Because if we can't even handle the migrants that are coming across the border right now and funding that and handling their dispersion across the country currently, how will we handle a mass immigration of 1 million excess migrants from Gaza, which do not share the fundamental culture of the United States, and with it will hold so fervently to the ideals of what caused the destruction of their homeland? Now we go on to Israel, and we see Israeli president suggest that civilians in Gaza are legitimate targets. It is an entire nation out there that is responsible. Isaac Herzog said he ordered 1.1 million Palestinians to evacuate their homes. One moment, I'm going to let this cat out. Come on, Shadow, let's go, buddy. Alright. My apologies. Cat was whining. So, as we said, Israeli president suggests that civilians in Gaza are legitimate targets, and he basically effectively claimed that they are less than human and that there is no such thing as an innocent Palestinian. Well, here's the deal. If you're a child, you're innocent. There is no excuse. That means there is no excuse for making up this bullshit rhetoric that there is no such thing as an innocent Palestinian child, because every single child is innocent. Alrighty, now on to another thing we have from the Huffington Post. Stunning State Department memo warns diplomats no Gaza de-escalation talks. As Israel escalates its offensive, U.S. diplomats are being discouraged from publicly using three phrases that would urge calm. So, they do not want to see de-escalation. In fact, it appears the I.D.F. is perfectly okay with seeing this ramped up exponentially, people speculating that people like Bibi Netanyahu allowing this to happen so he could further allow the persecution of the Palestinians and possibly the further wiping of them off of the map. Now we go on to another thing from the Huffington Post. Israeli president says there are no innocent civilians in Gaza, and this is just another posting of this. I wanted to show that if you cannot find these articles many of the times on the actual websites themselves, or you cannot find it through the Google search bar, if you go to Microsoft and you search it, a lot of times you can actually find these articles completely devoid of many of the ads that they are trying to push, and you will be able to get the context itself without having to filter through all of the consistent bullshit that is pushed straight to the top of the search bar many a times. Now we go on to one more, and this is the same exact thing. I did not mean to actually put this here. Okay, if that's the case, I'm going to go ahead and leave it there. Thank you for watching if you got this far. Do not fall for the propaganda that is being consistently pushed about the nature of war, because any citizen that dies that is an innocent person in this conflict is a tragedy, and there is no excuse on either side. I'm going to leave it there. Thumbs up if you liked it. Thumbs down if you didn't. Tell me where I'm wrong in the comment section down below. There is zero excuse for the crimes of the I.D.F. There is zero excuse for the crimes of Hamas. Stay lovely. Stay great. Subscribe if you like this kind of content. Peace out.